the future's here, but just not spread out evenly. And we have some power users, and you kind of know who they are, and they're jumping from these different tools and using things very differently. Those guys are way ahead, and they're the ones who help me evaluate these tools. And then some people that are just kind of getting on board. But I would say largely we have a high adoption rate. So it's
Right.
not end utilization. If we look at like our 4 pillars of measurement, it's like utilization, like satisfaction, and then engineering effectiveness, and then like business value. We can check off that we have utilization, and we have our satisfaction from the users. We get feedback.
Yep.
And now we
Yep.
can show some engineering effectiveness. Getting the business
Yeah.
value is a little harder.
Philip Sears is the GenAI Enablement Lead at Grainger, where he helps engineering teams integrate AI tools across the software development lifecycle through strategy, evaluation, and hands-on learning. He's a technology leader with over 20 years of experience in software development, quality engineering, and AI enablement, in addition to a long career covering lots of different roles in different software teams. Leadership roles at SQA Group, Expansion, and over 14 years at K-State University in development QA and teaching. Philip holds a bachelor's at computer science and also an MBA from K-State, and is passionate about building high-performing engineering cultures. Philip, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. Me too. Let's start out with you a little bit. Let's talk about, we just heard your bio, right? But what exactly is a GenAI Enablement Lead? And maybe tell us a little bit about Grainger too and how you found it.
Yeah. So what I do as a GenAI Enablement Lead is a few things. The first thing is shepherding these tools, AI tools, through an evaluation lifecycle. So that's more of a tool focus. But it's also a heavily people focus role where we're trying to help teams. It's a coaching role and advocating through the community. And I think lastly, it is how to measure outcomes. And that's a very exciting and tricky thing with AI. If you don't know about Grainger, Grainger is the largest MRO supplier company in North America. MRO is maintenance, repair, and operations. We're a Fortune 500 company. And I think what attracted me there is that we have a very, very strong product engineering organization, a lot of strong leaders and folks that have been doing this for a while. And I could tell that right away. But I've actually been there about 3.5 years now. I think how I found out about that was very, very interesting. That I know a lot of people know people in network for roles, but I just applied and didn't really know a lot of people, and so that was like, it took some adjusting to get to, but I feel like lucky to be there. But at that point in time, there was no GenAI enablement lead. I don't know if there was anywhere, but there wasn't at Grainger. I was a quality engineering practice lead. So I was everything testing. So, the GenAI enablement lead role, which is new at Grainger and new for me, started at the end of last year, beginning of this year, where, and I may repeat this, but where I think at Grainger and a lot of places, AI went from interesting to expected. And I think that's where we're at. Not forced, but interesting to expected. So now it's closer to business as usual in some way.
Got it. So my connection to Grainger, I personally used to work for a consulting company called ThoughtWorks. And one of the heads of technology at ThoughtWorks was a guy, Johnny Leroy, who's CTO now there at Grainger, as I understand it. And yeah, I remember when he was there at Grainger as a consultant, he was talking about how Grainger's got a really good engineering culture, and I'm sure he's only helped to improve that since he's joined. So yeah, it's my understanding that it's a pretty good place to work.
Absolutely.
So that I can see that jump to AI as expected, right? And the other part I can relate to about what you're saying, right? Like in my day job right now as a consultant, I'm working with another enterprise, Fortune 500 kind of publicly traded company, and they're wrestling with, like, we've got to get the right SOW in place and the right MSA, and we've got to make sure that the privacy policy is right, because if all their devs start installing these tools, that is a considerable risk to their organization, right? And
Yeah.
we like to laugh and say, oh, well, startups move faster and procurement takes so long in enterprise, but that's for good reason. It kind of wouldn't be great if, like, everybody started running different directions and using whatever tools they wanted.
Yeah.
So, yeah, can you talk about, like, how that's gone with you guys? I mean, like,
Yeah.
for most developers, you start playing with this tool and that tool, and then you start thinking, well, gosh, like, what am I going to do? But how's that worked for you guys so far, right? How did it come up, and what's your role been in terms of making the movement there?
Yeah. In a way, even though we're nearly 100-year-old supply company, some of this, there is some startupness to this whole process where we just like, at some time this year, after learning the hard way, started developing this 4-phase framework to rolling out tools. Again, this wasn't like, oh, we've got it all figured out. It's like, okay, well, that didn't work. That didn't work. But all of those things are incorporated in that. And the first phase of that is a review and approval. And each phase has a purpose and outcome, and trying to make that clear. The second phase is experiment. So, and then you have the outcome of that is for learning. Then the third phase is pilot, and the outcomes expectations of that is to actually validate and make a business case to do the fourth phase, which is roll out in production. And at that point, you've got all the sorts of things that are exciting, like customizations and integrations and enablement. But it's good to know that once you're trying to pilot something, everybody's going to ask you, is this okay? And you have to do that. So there was a time in that AI review process that I spent a lot of my time there, and we value stream mapped it. We realized how long it was. There was sequencing issues between procurement and legal and all these things. And everybody was so cooperative to come together and figure out what's the right order to that. And now kind of we have it down to a science. We're finding ways to even optimize those things and kind of have criteria that say this is the right size of these sorts of things. So I think, they're saying, shadow AI is here, but at least where I sit, I feel like we know where we stand. When we're experimenting something, I can say, yeah, we already have the NDA, the data, security, data privacy, architecture, everything you can think of is all taken care of. Don't worry about that. Just try out this tool and see what you think.
Got it.
But it took a while to get there.
Yeah.
But I think like every one of those is better.
Got it. What can you say about what tools folks are working with, and what's working for you guys? I mean, can you talk about tool names? Can you talk about tool categories? Like what sorts of things are being used inside the enterprise?
Yeah. I don't want to vendor bash or anything here, but the easiest path for the most people at Grainger is GitHub Copilot. And that is the one thing. Just stepping back from that is, we were already GitHub users, so we had that platform. So it's very natural to just turn that on. And I think we had to figure some things out. And I would say for every opinion about AI, you should put it with its timestamp. When I started with GitHub Copilot, we were talking about, hey, if it only knows about the file open in the tab, and it only has like these models, and it doesn't have a command line interface or a coding agent. So we've seen that develop a lot, and that's pretty much widely available. But we've evaluated a bunch of other tools through this process, and we've evaluated a lot of tools. And I think that Windsurf had been a successful pilot, and we're just rolling out for a set of users on that. We've done a couple others. Not everything has been successful, but that's something we learned. I would say, just like a general take on this, it's almost kind of, I don't know what you call it, a religious argument to get in and say like this tool works better. It's like Java versus .NET or something before, or web frameworks. A lot of them are going to have feature parity and be very similar. And maybe at some point the value is how how you use them. And so we're kind of
Yeah.
talking about like, let's make the best of what we had. Another,
And it sounds like in your role, like part of the mandate is not necessarily to pick a winner, but to sort of say this one is safe, that one is safe, go ahead. Am I getting that right?
yeah, well, I don't myself pick a winner. I have my point of view, but I usually take that, going back to that process of a piloting. So it's
Right.
important to take that pilot and say we have 4 or 5 different product teams. We have infrastructure, we have platform, we have data, AI, ML. Get a diverse group of people in that pilot and have them use it on real pilot is real work and get feedback and get analysis, do business cases, and then for the example of Windsurf or other we've moved forward with, then it's not just like, hey, I think this feels better, but more than 75% said this or whatever, thought it was better, or here's a
Yeah.
reason, or here's a kind of a criteria matrix that compares them. But a lot of them are do have like some feature parity. I
Mm.
also wanted, like, when you asked this question, I wanted to like footnote, people think of the coding harness and the model together sometimes in conversation, but they're
Right.
separate, and even the model provider. And I've got a couple of examples of that. With GitHub Copilot, by far what works well, I mean, right now, maybe not 2 months from now, is Claude Sonnet,
Right.
models. But those Claude
Mm-hmm.
Sonnet models are also available in Claude and Windsurf
Right.
and others. So like, how you do context management and the combination of those things are important. And even with Claude Code, we could look at that and go like, do we get first party through Anthropic, or do we use AWS Bedrock, or
Mm-hmm.
bring our own provider?
Mm-hmm.
So that's important in the analysis, because it could be apples to apples or apples to oranges, or you know things are non-deterministic. So that's what makes it sort of hard to evaluate these overly scientifically with our resources. But
Right.
we try to say, okay, are you using this with this model and that?
Yeah, no, 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 for sure. And I like how you're sort of decoupling, like I think you called it the harness from the model,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, I've got smart friends who talk to me about Bedrock, right, where like AWS will sort of rent you all of the models. I guess I haven't used it yet. And to your point, I guess even Claude Code and including the interface then. And like, yeah, I realize that Copilot can talk to different models behind it, but that as well. It's funny how this is all sort of disaggregating and becoming sort of smaller and smaller chunks in a tool chain, which is kind of nice. But I'm not sure how much listeners will know about all of this stuff. This is a little bit of an experiment. So can you talk a little bit about like what you mean, right? Like Copilot and Sonnet, I think is probably pretty understandable. But talk about Bedrock and what that brings to the table and how that changes things.
So there's the idea that you could use Claude Code, and so like that's the coding harness. So you install it as a command line interface, and you have an API key or whatever. Um, the idea is you could actually use your own AWS Bedrock instance or backing, and bring your own key or API and plug it into Claude Code. And we have done that. And that, I couldn't even tell you all the details of that analysis. Just there are trade offs, maybe in both.
Right.
Whether you use a subscription there, and you can ask kind of both parties there. I think it's something to look at if you want to go first party and get your license
Yeah.
through Anthropic. Both sides between them have been very friendly and shared those trade-offs. But for us,
Right.
we, like example, when we started, we already had AWS Bedrock. We were using it already with our ML team, so then we just hooked it
Right.
up. Um, Actually, the same thing or similar thing can happen with GitHub Copilot, where you have all the options available with GitHub Copilot, but maybe you want to use some open source front end or coding harness to it. So I
Yeah.
think there's like more things available, even if you only have one approved tool. It's
Right.
just so much
I
more
could see it.
opportunity.
I can see it from an enterprise perspective being a really attractive idea to say like, no, this is our model. You know, I mean, yeah, we're going to use this front end tool, but you're going to have it talk to our model, right? And maybe does that mean they can train it on corporate data that would be, you know, you wouldn't want in like the general model. I don't, is that the kind of stuff you guys are looking at with this, or is it more like, no, I just want to be able to go from GPT-5 to to Claude, and I'm only paying at AWS. I don't have to have an account with all of these different companies. Is it sort of a billing thing, or is there some other value that it's bringing to the table?
So I mean, there are security questions. It's a billing and agreement thing. I would simplify it by saying you know, it's not about, in this case, it's not about training models. It would probably
Right,
be
right,
GPT 5 in Anthropic or GPT-5 in Bedrock. But I would say
right.
like how you bill and track that and everything and the agreements
Yeah.
there would be different.
Yep.
And if you kind of already have it, and maybe there are other things I'm not thinking top of mind that would be you can bring your own model too. I think it's just interesting to know that optionality is available, and you can even we've gotten help from both sides on that.
Cool, cool. No, thank you. So yeah, I mean, a lot of the interest for me is not just what tools are being used, but sort of at what stages. What can you? I mean, obviously, internal team names won't mean much to us, and you probably don't want to get that specific.
Hmm.
But what stories can you tell about like how it's being adopted? Like, do you have some teams that are way ahead and others that are further back? And what seems to be the marker for that? And like or yeah, like think about it in terms of your different populations who are or at different stages with these tools. Like how do they operate, and then what's that experience been like for them?
Yeah, so I think the future's here, but just not spread out evenly. And we have some power users, and you kind of know who they are, and they're jumping from these different tools and using things very differently. Um, I won't name names, but those guys are way ahead, um, and they're the ones who help me evaluate these tools. Um, and then some people that are just kind of getting on board. But I would say largely we have a high adoption rate, so it's
Right.
not and utilization. If we look at like our four pillars of measurement, it's like utilization, like satisfaction,
Mm-hmm.
and then engineering effectiveness, and then like business value. We can check off that we have utilization, and then we're starting to check off that we have that business value. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I
Okay.
mean, sorry,
Got it.
I misspoke there. We have utilization. We have our satisfaction from the users. We get feedback.
Yep.
And now we
Yep.
can show some engineering effectiveness. Getting the business
Yeah.
value is a little harder. So
Right.
when we're looking at outcomes, when you look at the individual team members, and I have lots of anecdotes from use cases, I think like the catchphrase that I use is like beyond code generation and code completion. By that meaning,
Mm-hmm.
we've done migrations, upgrades,
Mm.
test generation, um,
Mm-hmm.
documentation, analysis, strangling
Yep.
away. You could just go down the list, but
Mm.
there's a bunch of use cases that I don't think is just code generation,
Right.
vulnerability remediation, in ways like I think that's the more advanced teams is creating these larger plans, and breaking those down those things. I would to use a buzzword, more agentic usage,
Yeah.
and we
Yep.
have several agentic tools available because Copilot has agent mode, um, and Copilot coding agent, and Windsurf is agentic, and we've piloted Devon as well that has agentic capabilities. So we've had
Yeah.
anywhere from, I guess, if you take the spectrum that is from totally vibe coding to AI assisted engineering, we have those in between. But I think we're, depending on the risk and the project, it may vary. Um, because, like, here's an example. If you're starting a new project from square one, um, I mean, I would rapid prototype. I was building this new AI dashboard, and I had like, this is just yesterday, I had meetings from like 8 to 4 or something that day. So in the meantime, I built the prototype of what I wanted and shared it with my teams. That's one
Mm.
situation as far as
Like while you were in meetings?
yes. I mean,
Nice.
it's just asking questions, and it's almost like the AI is the developer, and I'm the technical product manager. It's going like,
Yeah.
okay, I want
Yeah.
I want these four measurement the pillars I mentioned. I should put these together, and it went and
Yeah.
did that.
Right.
So that
Right. Right. Right.
that would be like on the low risk, but I think on the higher, I don't want to say risk or challenge, is if we have more monolithic or heritage applications that have been around for a while. Those are a little harder to just start building prototypes. And
Right.
we've seen the AI is almost more about understanding those and
Yeah.
analyzing them.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep. I'm hearing similar things when I interview people that like that they can be they. Pete Hodson, one of our guests, talked about like every time a coding agent walks up to a code base, it's its first day, right? So
Yeah,
they because of their context window limitations,
of
right? So
course.
they have to be good at like spiraling through a code base really quickly. So yeah, I follow you there, right? Like to your point, yeah, I like how you listed it out, like vulnerability remediation, versus strangling even, right? Like I mean, I assume you mean like not violently strangling there, but the
Yeah,
the, the fig strangler, the strangler vine pattern, where you're sort of creating new things and removing old functionality bit by bit and strangling away an older application. The
yeah,
strangler vine, I think it's sometimes referred to, but I hadn't thought
exactly.
about using an AI to do it. Like that's cool. I mean, tell me more about like how you talked about code migration, testing, documentation. Like how does it fit into each one of those? Like maybe that would be an interesting vein.
Yeah, I could maybe double click on a couple of those. Like documentation and analysis. That's where I basically say understanding a code base.
Yeah.
Example is like we have a big, more monolithic, multi 100,000 line of code app. I pull it up in say IntelliJ. What the heck is this? What's going on? Like I
Yeah.
in this example, I put it in plan mode. I had
Yeah.
my own chat mode, which is like a custom agent for GitHub Copilot, and I asked it to come up with a plan for me to how to understand and analyze this code. Once I did that, it gave me commands so that I was able to run those on Workspace. And one cool example that I had it do was generate mermaid diagrams. So by the end
Mm.
of this, I had the architecture of the system and the different dependencies and those kinds of things. So kind of to borrow the strangler pattern idea, obviously not strangling, but it's a pattern known in the industry, I'm sure. But
Yep. Yep.
how to pull something out of into like say a new modernized microservice. We use
Mm-hmm.
some of that analysis and would side by side in a workspace go, okay, tell me what
Yeah. Okay.
what is the plan to pull this forward, and now start building this in like a new template, a new way of doing things. And I think
Yeah.
it's when you get into that depths of things, there a bunch of more important things that matter, especially when building something from scratch. Because I don't think we want to build things from scratch. That's a can of worms. I'm
Right.
happy to get into that, but like that's kind of some of the use cases there in testing. That I mean, I think we talk about our systemable defaults and test driven development, all those things. Like right now, I could revisit this opinion, but the our opinion is right now that these sensible defaults and testing and automation and CI/CD, those are more important. Like even if, especially with AI assisted development,
Yeah.
and they can help. So
Yep.
there's definitely a play for unit tests, every kind of testing, even using like Playwright MCP to, or some sort of UI automation
Mm.
MCP to run tests ad hoc or other kinds of things. But like that, I mean, that's been very fruitful and probably one of the earlier use cases that we did. Now, I mean, I would caution like doing that blindly. I would say like you should look at the test because we've also had read about this and heard from other people, but also
Yep.
experienced myself to be
Yep.
like, oh, write these tests, run these tests. And you go look, and then you're like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, write a negative
Yep.
test. There's a suite of negative tests. And I'm like, they're API tests. And it's just going to some nonsense endpoint and doing like, these are all your negative. It's like,
Yep.
that's not useful. So
Yep.
with anything, more specific guidance is better.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
checking,
I
human in the loop.
Yeah, I'm glad human must be in the loop for now, no doubt. So to your point, I like this thought of a playwright MCP. I think of MCP as God. I'm not even sure I could tell you what it stands for, but it's sort of a protocol that Anthropic's been talking about, which allows, I think of it as tool use. I think it's sort of like a way for probably a coding harness, maybe a model, to go access something that isn't in the model already, right? And frequently it's documentation or something like that. And I think a playwright, obviously, as it's sort of a browser driver, kind of style testing framework where you can do functional suite. So like that seems like you could put them together and achieve win. But what does that look like? Like what are you doing with those two things? Like help me understand that better.
Yeah. Spot on the MCP, Model Context Protocol, MCP. And there, for most of the tools we have, there's like an MCP marketplace. So I'll just categorize those as like official MCP servers or whatever, where they
Yeah.
run or how
Yep.
they are or how you set them up could differ. If it's GitHub, you might have more security involved, but like with Playwright, it's super easy. So like to start, all I would just go to is like click in the marketplace. It depends on what tool you're using in marketplace, and or like a CLI, maybe a slash command. It's there, and so
Right.
once it's there, you turn on in that Playwright MCP. Like I think they're called tools. The different capabilities. They could be read. They could be write. It depends. If you're talking about like some like GitHub or some real server, then that's more interesting. With Playwrights, to me, pretty safe. And now within my IDE, I could ask it to run tests, and I ask it to generate tests and
I see.
validate those. And so now
Right.
I think the unlock of MCP is earlier on. I said something about old old Copilot only knew what's open in the tab. And then it was like,
Right.
hey, now you can at workspace or something, say everything in your workspace. Now, what about
Yep.
other stuff? What about something in a browser, something in Jira, or something, in EKS, or all those things? And I
Right.
think this is a
Right.
way that, like you said, it can get more context to external systems. Right now, I think the like no brainer engineering experience is to look at those. I guess I don't know what the right word is for it, but official MCPs where it's like
Yeah.
not someone rolled their own. There
Right.
is some. I mean, not to say we haven't. We have built our own, but with care, because I think
Yeah.
like we said how powerful that is. With power comes responsibility, and I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
that the security folks would, and we have good security team, would
Yeah.
not want. I mean, that's one of the things that comes to mind. It's like, wow, this could
Right.
my code. This can do
Right.
anything. It could, like, oh, now I've got the email connection. Now it's going to go email. Like that kind of stuff. You can only
Exactly.
imagine.
No. I'm with you, right? Like, I mean, it's when you take a dependency on an open source library, when you're slinging Python, like you kind of don't know what all you're pulling in. And to your point, if you're pulling in an unofficial MCP server, it now has a lot of access to your code, and you don't know really who rolled it. But to your point, if you rolled it your own and got your own security team's feedback, yeah, then that's a different thing. Is that happening a lot at Grainger? Is that like a path that you see that people might take?
I think yes, we have Grainger MCP, and I think that there could be more future in there. And I think there's maybe debates about whether this is a new API or whatever. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I can certainly see how, if you're building platforms, if you have, I mean, searching for products or something at Grainger, those kinds of things you may
Mm-hmm.
want to expose to other places. And I come to this call very focused on Gen AI for engineering flow and SDLC, and like I'm sitting
Right.
down and building something. But I mean, like we have AI built into our business and built in our products and
Yeah.
those. I mean, like
Right.
there's so many orientations there, but we also have to think about this product wants to connect to this product, or probably things I'm not even thinking about. So I
Yeah,
can
yeah.
see why um, that would be something that you did. We just haven't said we're going to build the Grainger Dev MCP. I'm not
Right,
saying that there weren't ideas or experiments. It's just like
right.
we started with, maybe there's another way to get context, and maybe we'll start like, this is probably the easiest and secure thing, is to go, okay, these are the, to socialize those in community, and
Cool.
there could be more MCP registry and all these more platform things involved to make that
Got it.
easier.
Cool. Maybe let's go back to the measurement. You know, we talked about utilization and satisfaction and effective and valuable. Um, to me, those sound right. I like that. I think I could adopt that like right away. To your point, utilization seems like it would be a fairly low bar to measure. You know, just look at the in Claude AI, you're just going to look at the commits and see
Yeah.
if it's in there, for instance, or just ask people, survey, right? And satisfaction may be similar, right? Sort of surveying.
Hmm.
Um, and effectiveness, like, yeah, I can cook up some ways, but what are you guys looking at in terms of thinking about what makes a tool effective, and what does that measurement look like for you guys?
So, before I answer your last question, I will share my thought process on left to right being easier but less value, and then
Mm,
harder and most value. So it's easy to measure utilization, but the
right.
hardest to measure business value. So each
Yep.
tick you go along the ways is, I would say, more difficult for us to
Mm-hmm.
comprehensively say. Like,
Yep.
if you joined us and sat down, I could just like, boom, this is exactly who's using our AI tools, and there's wonderful visuals there. Done. So people are using that. Um, that's the good part. Like the adoption, if no one's using it, you're not going to get somewhere. The satisfaction, we do these surveys in pilot groups, and we get great
Okay.
feedback there. We have that's fairly easy. At some point we realize we just ask people, and we can learn a lot from there. So I think those
Yep.
are, we can correlate those. The third one, we're looking at kind of what's already there too, but
Mm-hmm.
if you're already measuring like code quality, um,
Mm-hmm.
Dora metrics,
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
things, then if you can correlate these things, then you have it. The
Yeah.
last one is very hard to do as a whole. But what if you had, you correlated this across like teams or domains or whatever, and so you've got utilization, um, satisfaction, effectiveness, Dora, and code, all those code quality or other things, vulnerabilities, etc. Then you could say, hey, how is Jira or something that has business value on delivering? What's that look like? So are we going
Right.
faster, but now we have more change failure rate?
Right.
Are we
Right.
are we forcing adoption on people? We're not, but like, so we've got this high utilization team, but now the code quality is bad and duplication and all that. Like, we're early. We have our. I'm sharing with you kind of the framework for this, but I would say we're further along from the left to right. Um, on the right hand
Yeah.
side of like business value, the way that we have done that very easily is not to do this for like, automate this for everything at Grainger. That's kind of hard, especially when you're talking about
Yeah.
business value, but by use case. So imagine like a use case where you said, we're going to do this migration or upgrade and these X amount of things with AI. We know what value that is. And now we can look at human equivalent hours. We can look at satisfaction. We can do that and put all that into a use case or hopefully a success story. And we create one pagers for that. But you could say, hey, before, they had, this upgrade, and they had the roadmap was disrupted
Mm.
by all these things, and it took them this long, and then it took them that long, and
Right.
um, and you can customize it to that story as well.
So to your point, like I mean, going to Java 26 or something, like the last time we did it, it took us, X number of days or weeks or whatever, and that was sort of human effort only. Is that what you mean when you're talking about upgrade here, like
Yeah,
library upgrades or software development kit upgrades, things like that?
yeah, it could be. We ported things as well. That's
Right,
just one example. Another one could be, you know, I mean, it could be anything, but I mean,
right.
one was like building a new dashboard for a team that was put on the backlog for
Hmm.
2 years, and then once you had I mean, like then it was like this happened. So, how do you quantify the business of that? It's hard to say the
Right,
business value, but
right.
you can tell it in a story and go like, this wasn't
Yeah,
able, we just didn't have the ability to do this, and now here's the value that these consumers of this application infrastructure application
yeah,
get from.
yeah. It's funny. I mean, part of what you're talking about right now, like it's making me think of a friend of mine, a software developer that I was working with in a previous life, and he was talking to me about his experience with the agentic tools and all of this, and talking about like Kyle, it used to be that in a week I would do let's say 5 points, and now I'm doing 5 points in a day. It's just absolutely phenomenal increase in productivity, and and from my own experience, I can relate to that. Like I think I've had like 4 hour hours, right? I think I've had 5 day days,
Mhm.
I think, yeah, but I think I've also like spent plenty of time watching it chase its tail on something stupid.
Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? So it's like
yeah,
and we hear things about like there was a big survey recently. I don't remember which university published it, but somebody was saying like, oh, it actually is a net loss or only barely, but it's not as good as it looks, something like that. I don't remember who it was, but yeah, so I think the effectiveness story is really interesting because like when you're in it, you can feel sometimes like, wow, that was fast, but then that means you're excusing it for a long time when it's not so fast on something else. And like, are we good timekeepers as humans in terms? Are we good accountants when we're working with this thing or not?
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I've read some of the same studies that say human reported time savings
right.
is not reliable. I mean, but we put that into satisfaction and to say if someone
Right.
that's a if you're an engineer and you're a happy engineer and you say like this took like
Yeah.
40% as long. I mean, what is that? I wish I had a good analogy for that, whether you're a carpenter or something, and every day, maybe it was the same, but every day you felt like you were doing a better job. I mean,
Yeah.
I do this for like email. Like if I had to write a very formal email to you, Kyle, and it was
Right.
like
Right.
I had to put a lot of thought into it. Maybe there was one time where I didn't use AI and I just pulled my hair out of like, oh, is this? And the one time I did, and I spent a little bit more time with AI, but then recouped it with the kind of automation. Like it was even time, but that felt so better and the outcome was better.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah. Yeah.
that's the way we think about this. Now
Yep.
these business cases, they should be as hopefully these success stories, hopefully human equivalent hours, which means we made up on the roadmap. But like
Right.
task by task, it's really hard to say. And I'm sure that people are having fun with it and,
Yeah.
learning through failure. But hopefully that's
Yeah.
a good investment. If it's here to stay, then like we're learning um,
Yep.
as an industry.
I sense that it's here to stay. Yeah, even when you read those surveys, it's just I know I'm not a good accountant, but I'm still pretty convinced. But getting back to what you were talking about though, like to your point, everything on the right end of that scale is harder to measure than the stuff on the left. I get that, but I'm trying to wonder like where do you guys draw the line from effectiveness versus value, right? Like I like how you say like oh self-reported it's 40% faster that goes to satisfaction. Like we can't necessarily measure that, so I'm going to put that in satisfaction instead. But effectiveness, like you talked about, like Dora and
Mhm.
quality. So I'm imagining like Sonar Cube feeding back and
Sure.
saying like, yeah, it's actually kind of fine. So okay, I think I can get effectiveness pretty easily. How do you get to value? Like that's been almost hard for us as an industry, or where are you guys drawing the line at value when it comes to these tools? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean I think that that's the $1 million question or $1 billion question or more than that. Um,
Trillion by NVIDIA's
yeah,
standards. Yeah, yeah,
I mean, we have some ideas on how we do that. I think again we've captured that from, I don't know if it's subjective, in smaller things where we can capture everything. Where we don't
yeah,
have that, like I would not call it done. Where we have this dashboard on the fourth side of the fourth pillar, it just goes like, here's much business value. You could
yeah.
estimate like human equivalent hours, time savings, and all of that, but how do you know that delivering something earlier has that value and
Right,
capture that at
right, right,
all
right,
these different task and activity levels? One
right.
one idea that we have is like, if Jira stories or something inherently has some value in them, and we deliver that or track that, put some business value in somewhere. Like, it's kind of, this is kind of the thing that I thought about when testing, when someone's like, hey, can you separately automate all these metrics? I'm like, no, like, if we have something already, use what's there. So like, if there's already, I'm
Yeah,
thinking like Jira,
yeah,
and that we already have Sonar, we already have Dora, we already, like, what can we
right.
do that's already happening that
Yeah,
either
yeah, yeah.
directly or through aggregate could just
Right.
present something close to business value? Jira
So
with,
this team used to keep my Jira cards around the same, and so they count cards. Like, did cards per week go up? This team used points or T-shirt sizes. Did that go up? So instead of inventing new metrics, try to lean on the ones that you've already got. I guess. Yeah.
or in more captured, where we have all the information we need, which is not automated yet, then we can probably pretty safely in a use case or project level get all
Yeah.
that somewhat manually in some cases, more or reported, and then calculate like the the business value. I think,
Cool.
this is where I'm just not so sure that, like, across, say we've got hundreds of people, using hundreds of tasks every day. I mean, hundreds, way more than that. And how to,
Yeah.
what are the values of all those things? That's a little harder.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. For sure.
I think
Okay.
I think maybe, to not be too much of a bean counter. If you have enough success stories, I mean, maybe there's some gut in here to go like, we're moving in the right
Yeah.
direction. And if you
Yep.
have,
Yep.
if you're an engineer and you have product involved, and the product side and the business side is showing their value, and they already have a
Yeah.
way of measuring, you can correlate that as well. And that may
Yeah.
depend. Maybe if it's custom order, like, are there abandoned carts or are there less abandoned,
Right.
like, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Something that's very
Mm-hmm.
business value.
Something in the funnel where you
Yeah.
can measure. Yeah. 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 100%. Yeah. And I like where you're going with that. Like, if sort of if we are all instinctually saying this is better, there's probably something to it. If it's just the developer, not that you shouldn't trust developers, but if it's just anybody, we maybe don't trust it. But to your point, like, if everybody's lining up and saying like, yeah, this is better, then yeah, I'm with you there. Okay. I wonder. So it's funny you talk about like, oh, we're still doing this and we're still doing that, but from my small perch, where I get to see into a few different organizations, you guys look pretty ahead. I'm sure there are organizations that are more ahead than you in the end, but especially organizations of scale and size, you guys are looking pretty good. I know plenty of people who are still like trying to get that privacy policy hammered out and,
Yeah.
and decide whether or not engineers are allowed to use it. And to your point on shadow AI, I know at least one team where I know they're not allowed to use it yet, and I still see Claude.ai going by in the commit stream. So, you know, but so all of this to say, I think it sounds like you guys are doing pretty good, right? You've got not only a way to decide like what tools are we letting in, but you're being really thoughtful about whether or not they look like they're helping, and sort of a measurement system, and you may decide to improve on that measurement system, but you've got one, and so that to me seems pretty far ahead. When you look back and you think about where you were a year ago, right? I don't know how long you guys have been on this journey, but what were missteps? What were things where you thought like, oh, for sure this is right, and it wasn't, or what have you learned along the process? What would you advise people there?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we learned everything on the process. And I think a couple things that we learned that are baked in the process is, look, you just have to use stuff and you have to experiment. And I think this is reflected in our leadership, that's going like, some things can fail. Just don't
Right.
swing for the fences. So that was inbuilt in our process to have these incremental rollouts where we can fail safely. So
Mm-hmm.
I think we might have held on to failures too long instead of just going like, look, this pilot is 4 to 6 weeks. No one should feel bad about this. This is what it's for, to learn. Let's just cut our
Okay.
losses. And now when I have a new engineer on my team, and I was telling him like, look, it's okay to try this experiment. We just need to like not drag it out. If it doesn't work, learn from that. We'll revisit it. We'll come up with analysis and next steps. I think another thing that we learned is I don't think that you can browbeat or deliberate someone into understanding AI for engineering. I think you
Right.
just need to experience it. And so that's
Yeah.
like where the
Yep.
just use it thing comes in. And we do a
Yep.
lot of immersive learning. So I think where success is in our workshops that we do. And when we pair with somebody, we just get into it. Like maybe if there's minimal PowerPoints and concepts, and like the concepts are all learned, whether it's context window or different modes or like hallucinations or non-determinism, you would learn that by going like, in this workshop there are 20 people and they got different answers. Look, people remember that way
Mm-hmm.
better. And those who are naysayers or not, they start using it, and it's not what they expected, better or worse, but
Right.
it's real. It's very different.
Right.
Uh,
Yep.
I think also another thing was, and this is like a point of pride for being in enablement, is you just don't get a tool and go like, we're done. The tools are amazing, models are amazing, all that. It's magic. But we say that's like, you can pick your numbers, allows to say 70% along the way. But what is the last 30%? Um,
Right.
the way that we thought about it, it's like prompt engineering skills. So two people have the same tool, they don't have the same prompt engineering skill or way of asking. It's going to get different results. The second part of that remaining 30% is context, managing
Yeah.
context. That's where
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
do a
Yep.
lot. We started doing a lot more with like agents markdown and custom instructions and rules and prompt files, and started
Yeah.
socializing those. Because
Yeah.
at the end of the day, when you have this tool and you're like, generate this React application or API or something, we're opinionated about that. You're just
Yep.
going to get the whatever comes from AI. So you can actually guide it that way with these
Right.
instructions. And I mean, there's work to do there, but we have had
So to your point, sort of
success.
building it into your delivery platform. If you've got like a service template, for instance, or something like that, that kind of training it on that, and like including that in the markdown, that like this is the one we use. We don't start new services without using it. And so to your
Yeah.
point, it's sort of ways to integrate it in. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. Concrete example. So we have an API template. Like we don't vibe a new API at Grainger that runs on
Right.
Series. We have an
Right.
API template, starter kit, whatever we want to say. It's forever kit, so it's not just like a starter kit. But within that
Mhm.
would be markdowns about that, you know, how to use this, and actually
Yeah.
even referencing our API style guides from architecture and trying to codify those into Markdown such that
Right.
they can understand that. Other things like test-driven development, even basic things like language, other things. So we see those like custom instructions. I know like agents Markdown is emerging standard. I think a lot of the tools are doing that, but we see like there are your personal instructions, there are project level instructions, and then there are like these template level instructions. There may be org level
Hmm.
instructions, that's pretty minimal, but we have this kind of hierarchy, and the tools
Cool.
allow for that.
Yep. Yep. No, I like that. That's smart. I also kind of want to deep dive into what you're talking about with like workshops and things like that. I mean, yes, of course. Like that's a good process for education. Like how is that working? Is that something that like a team will lead, or does your part of the organization lead that? Like how does that happen? These workshops.
So important context of where I started. We are engineering effectiveness. That's my team, and we have the dojo. That's our classic E. I was practice lead. So in our DNA in a dojo is immersive learning. and
Right.
workshops and those kinds of things. So it was pretty natural. I mean, because we were QE, my colleague Joe and I, we started with GitHub Copilot for Testing workshop, and now we've scaled this, and we have more workshops for more people are facilitating across our team, and more teams are joining even outside of product engineering, and we just bring them through the process. So very little presentation, very little. I mean, the concepts are inbuilt. So imagine if you went to this GitHub Copilot for Testing workshop, you would be in with 15 other, whatever the amount, colleagues, and you would just start.
Right.
We'd say, hey, let's start with this Kotlin um, app. And if you don't know Kotlin, that's fine, because you'll use AI as a tutor and you do that. Or like, I think the very first thing that we started from scratch was like, just to see how this works. And this is in the way back machine, but like, let's build a calculator. So, and people
Right.
who never use AI for coding, they like ask it to build a calculator, just like, now ask it to test a calculator. Now ask it to,
Right.
like, try these other things. And it's experiential, and everybody has a lot of fun. And I think you've get to there, you've already onboarded them, they're already utilizing it, and they're seeing those concepts in real time. Or someone would be like,
Love it.
wait, it didn't do this or didn't do that. The failures is like, oh, you got to be specific. You didn't say the right name, and it created something. All those war stories that you can start learning.
Yep.
And now
Yep.
we've advanced
So
that to like coding agents and other more advanced things. So we have intro, um, medium, advanced level, and we'll continue doing these kinds of.
yeah, got it. So okay, but to your point, when I think of dojo, I think of the sort of old coding dojo style where Randori, where you've got like 10, 15 people, and like there's only one keyboard though, right? And maybe there's an egg timer, and it's got like a 3-minute countdown, and when that goes off, I stand up and you sit down, and we're sort of all working on the same code. Is that what you mean when you're talking about dojo, or is it more like we're all quietly working on our own calculator? Like, help me understand like what it's like to be in those workshops a little
Yeah,
better.
yeah, good question. The dojo is more context as far as like in the engineering effectiveness DNA, how we started with the dojo. I would say like, I mean, that was 2021, 2022 where we started. So you had those foundational dojos. It's probably more
Right.
like a classic dojo format. This is like we're beyond whatever you say, beyond
Right.
dojos now.
Right.
So we build things. We are actually within engineering effectiveness. We have testing practices. We have AI enablement. A
Right.
lot of things that like
So I walk into a room, I bring my own laptop, I guess, and like I install the tool, and what is the workshop? Like, does the instructor say like, okay, now everyone say, make me a calculator? Like, how?
yeah.
Walk me through that a little bit more. Yeah.
So we would let's say we want to do this new testing workshop. First thing we would have is some sort of advertisement and registry, and we put it in these. We have these community channels, like we have GenAI for SDLC community channel, and you may see that it says because we want to know what level they are, or like I've never coded at all, never used an IDE. Well, maybe
Right.
something different. So we get them right size in there, and then they can everything's kind of opt in, or so we could have people across the organization, which is fun, or we could have a whole team do that. Then we have some pre-work session, or at least we used to this. Maybe some of these are not necessary, but the pre-work sessions to let everybody get up to speed. And maybe someone's like, well, I didn't get access or something, and we can spend extra time with them. And then 2 more days we'll have, or whatever, we'll have the session, and that will be one facilitator, usually kind of a wing person, and it can go back and forth. But they'll basically say, and we already have the kind of recipe on Confluence. They'll say, okay, we're going to start and do this together. And we'll just go through simple examples of using the functionality and why, and ask questions. But everybody is in almost entirely these virtual sessions, which are pretty low overhead, really. They're doing
Right.
it in their locally.
So it's a Zoom dial-in where they're
Yeah,
already on their development laptop, and so they're just sort of
exactly.
command tabbing or alt tabbing out.
And
Okay,
that's the
got it, got it,
pre-work.
got it,
A
got it.
lot of times, especially early on, that was the pre-work to go to make sure, like if someone didn't have access, that they,
Right, right,
we could spend extra time with them, or maybe they're like,
right.
I entered the advanced, workshop? Should I be in the intro, or does it support,
Right.
like, we get, and not everybody's waiting in the beginning, because since we're expecting everybody, then we can hit the ground running there and everybody's doing it together.
One of my next calls will be to request VPN access. Well, I already did request it, and now somebody needs to help me get the comp file installed on my laptop. So, right,
Yeah,
to your point about prereqs, I can imagine in enterprise there's a number of those to get
exactly.
satisfied. Okay, cool. No, I love this. We haven't heard much yet about like how what's the how of spreading it around, right? And to your point, like right now, education does seem like it's the thing. Okay, so but then that brings me to a question: how have you already had to update that? Right, like this stuff is kind of moving fast, and you hinted at like we all started with Copilot, and
Yeah,
that seems right to me. Like VS Code, and like wow, it tab completed 5 lines, and which was amazing, back in the day,
yeah,
and still kind of is sometimes. But then now you're onto agentic, and it might be editing 20 files in a 30-second span, right?
yeah.
And so, like, how much have you had to like keep that those workshop Confluence docs up to date? Like, how much have you had to like iterate already on the training that you're doing?
Yeah, it is, we would call it a series, and it's evolving. So,
Yeah.
the things that are in the series now did not exist when we started it. So, I mean, like, if we have a coding agent workshop, that was for something new. And I think that's a really good way to, I mean, it goes both directions too. If you were helping enable teams with some new feature that was just turned on and preview by a vendor, um, you can get some early adopters to go through this workshop. You're kind of leading the charge. You can get some feedback. You can see it in action. It's super
Yeah.
cool. So these will evolve. I'd also say, like, with for some of these other vendors and tools, there are there are white glove enablement sessions. So a lot of the
Mm,
100 or 200 level stuff, we can get kind of everybody together. That's what we're doing with
right.
Windsurf. But we're going to want, ultimately, I mean, this is what we do, some opinionated stuff. Um,
Yeah.
like the GitHub customizations, or the agents. I'm sorry, the Windsurf rules, or other things are going, like, this is how we're putting Grainger sensible defaults into this, or
Right.
these kinds of things. So it's
Yep.
really more of a concept than it is an artifact. So and since we brought some new folks in and they're leading those, I feel like this can be, once the idea is there, it can be pretty scaled.
Cool. Cool. That's exciting. I hadn't thought about it, but to your point, yeah, the vendors would have stuff too. I mean, how much of this is canned versus workshop? I mean, like to your point about Confluence, it would probably make sense to have some like here's some go get started, and here's walk you through those prereqs and those kinds of things. Like,
Yeah.
how much of the what is there a ratio there, or like what makes more sense? In a doc, and what might make more sense in like a video that gets distributed, and what makes more sense in a workshop so far?
Yeah. So I think my model is, there's like kind of three tiers, and there's maybe like the basic foundation, which is like, and then we have like those off the job self-paced learning. So think of like
Mm-hmm.
O'Reilly or Pluralsight or other things, or
Yeah.
reading books. That's there for everybody. I don't think you're going to get to the finish line there. Then at that next level, it's immersive learning workshops, and we have study groups, we have other cohort things, enablement sessions, all kinds of stuff like that.
Mm,
And I think at the highest level, when we start getting these power users involved and sharing advanced things and kind of pushing, we have a community of practice where people are sharing things. So that's kind of the tiers. So, foundational, off the job, on the job, and now you're actually getting into like war stories, and
yeah. Right.
outcomes, and we're looking at doing more dojo, whether you use the term dojo or what not, but outcomes based engagements. The workshops is like immersively, we'll teach you how to use coding agent, but the next on our roadmap is like, okay, bring your challenge to us. We're starting with this problem base, not a solution
Mm,
base, and go like,
mm,
oh, you have to rationalize or this upgrade, and I don't know, anything. Bring it to us, and we'll help you bring AI to the table. and we've done a couple of those, but we haven't really industrialized it. But I think it's always a combination of those things. Different people are at different parts of their journey, teams as well, and it's not,
Yeah.
and people learn differently. So I've used all of them myself, including like Pluralsight and O'Reilly AI Academy, and just reading books. But then I just try things and do the workshop, and then learn from others, kind of the power users that are sharing in these communities.
Cool. Cool. That amazing. So another sort of stream for this, and thank you so much for going through this in so much detail. It's some of the answers, like you might feel like, well, of course, but but not everybody's done this yet, right? So even just hearing that, like, yeah, the basics still work is good, and it's helping. But to switch for a minute, like I want to think about like what impacts you've seen on the organization, right? And of course, we've all seen the doom and gloom headlines, or sometimes they're overly excited, profit-led headlines around like you're not going to need any software developers anymore, or software developers will never find work, and neither one of those is true, obviously. But I do wonder, like I've talked to a friend of mine who's VP engineering at a very small startup where the whole development team is 3 people, right? And like he uses Windsurf and she uses Copilot and that one uses Claude Code, and they also have really changed the way that they work, where you described it earlier as being like a technical project manager or technical program manager, however you want to think about it, where they're like just sort of actively working with it to create their feature, and then they sort of talk when it's time to integrate those. And that's it. And for a 3-person shop, like maybe that's fine, right? But what that means though, there's not business analysts, there's not product managers, there's not testers. This is not really a story of like, oh, and that's because AI, that they set out to be that way before GenAI came around. But it does make me wonder if we're going to see those kinds of effects. Have you seen a team where like, okay, we thought we needed to hire 10 people, but now we don't? Have you seen a team where they change their ratio of like QAs to developers? Like you're integrating with a lot of teams.
Mm-hmm.
So what have you seen as far as the impact? Like, do they put as much energy into story writing as they used to, or even more? Like what can you tell us about like what the future looks like inside of this?
Yeah, I mean, I can, some of these things I can only guess, and some of them I've seen. I think there's like the next step, which is just the AI assisted engineering, and you do everything the same as you did before. You just bring AI to the table.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what's widespread. And even then, let's say we're not changing the headcount. Let's not change anything. What changes? What changes about the flow of the team? So say you're doing
Mm-hmm.
trunk-based development, and somebody's way ahead and using this AI tool and creating all these PRs and getting
Mm-hmm.
ahead of everybody, or like there's going to
Yeah.
be flow changes that we need to think about, and it's possible that teams will be smaller. I think like we think about the idea of like what does ludicrous mode look like? That was what Johnny coined, and what would that look like? How is that different? How do you work with product differently? I mean, the first things that come to mind to me is like, why don't you just ask product what you want and quickly prototype something? Maybe it's that day that you see something working. Um, Maybe with all of these agentic things, it's just too hard to be the 10th team member of reviewing all these things, and you have to have more
Yeah.
agents doing the reviews and those kinds of things. I mean, that's a little futurist. I think if you have the right risk profile of that, I
Right.
think that you can do a lot more with less. But I think you need that, the prompt engineering. I think you need the context management. I think you need,
Yeah.
all the foundational things. But certainly, if you did all these things right, it would be a fairly redundant or almost unfun to be the whatever
Yeah.
10th.
Yeah.
I just came up with 10, but that 10th member on that team, whereas maybe
Yeah.
there's only a few people, like you said.
Yeah. So to your point about flow, and like I like how you started with like let's hold everything the same. I think what you're saying with flow, I can relate to, right? Like often, if I'm not careful, I'm like, oh, AI is going to make this Greenfield app easy, so I'm just going to go start this Greenfield app, and I don't quite finish it, and then I get sucked into a meeting, and then I do another one later that night, and then I get sucked into another meeting, and then all of a sudden I have all these half-finished Greenfield projects around me, and it's like that's not good, right? That's not actually getting value to users at all. But so to your point, like even if I am staying focused and I am sort of progressing along the right track and creating new code for the right reasons, like I can imagine that another developer on the team who was out for 2 hours to go to the dentist, right, coming back and being like, "There's how much change now," right? And to your point, trunk-based development, we were, there was an assumption of sort of a human scale of code being added, and that we could all just sort of like, do a get pull minus rebase or whatever it was and pull those changes in instead of having to do a PR. But like, is that an observation that like teams are saying like, oh, it's not working anymore. Like we need more branching in order to, because the flow is like more of a surge over here as opposed to like a small trickle everywhere. Am I reading that right?
Um, yeah, I'm not quite sure. Um, I think it may be different for different teams. I just think
Yeah.
like it is going to disrupt some of the individual and team flow. Trunk based development. I mean, PR culture. I mean, I don't think you want AI doing trunk based development. Um, so I'm not sure
Not on its own, sure,
on
certainly.
its own.
Uh,
So
yeah,
I mean, it's going to change how you work with Git. It's going to change how when you're
yeah,
pairing now you're whatever it is,
yeah,
and
yep,
sometimes you're waiting for AI to do something and you're doing something
yep,
else, and then like
yep,
the talk is and we're doing this too in pockets, but like parallel, it's not single threaded anymore. Like you can
right,
jump
right,
around. So I mean, the flow concept is gonna like if now you turn that make that go faster and better.
yeah.
If you're not managing
To your
the flow
point,
right, and the whole idea of the
yeah,
flow is like you're creating different
right,
bottlenecks where maybe
right,
you have all this work queued up, and that it's a
right,
different
right.
process
But and
altogether.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, fine. So I've got like three agents going, each in their own work tree, and this one's got a right, right. So yeah, I don't even want them on the same trunk. To your point, I've got them in work trees so that they don't step on one another. Yeah, but I do. It's been pointed out in other interviews too that like it's so generative. Like it really helps with like up until the coding point, but the actual getting it online and creating value with it, it's not necessarily helping with that part yet, and so it's definitely it's not alleviating any pressures there. It's just moving the bottleneck. To your point, how have you seen teams deal with that moving the bottleneck?
So I mean, I think being cognizant of the bottleneck and trying to like this is like going to 1980 theory of constraints or
Yeah,
those kinds of things, but if you're just addressing more in work in progress ahead of in front of the bottleneck, you're not really helping the process. So if the
yeah,
problem is not code generation development, it's testing, or it's code a tech debt or design or understanding
right.
requirements. I think we need to bring AI across the SLC. We are doing that,
Yeah,
but I think that when I made a graph to show all the different things of just for funsies, and it was like, this is the development side, but here was like the design or requirements. But
yeah,
if you're having a hard time with like breaking down epics or coming up with visions, those are the things, or story refinement. Those are the things that have really good plays with AI, and maybe you're just not bringing those folks along, or the adoption
okay,
right there. So I see like expanding left and right, or if you have
right,
problems with observability or something in production, there's AI. Maybe it's not Gen AI, but it's got
yeah,
to be AI plays with those.
yeah,
I think like trying to get outside of code generation alone.
yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. I like that. So to your point around, and yes, Elias Goldratt and the goal, right, and bottleneck management and so on. To your point, if like you're just creating code faster, like the answer is not well, maybe it's hire more test engineers, but I don't know, sort of like. But also, how might you make the QE folks faster, and that might be the same thing, that sort of assisted engineering
Yeah.
on that side. And then how do you make the deployment faster? That also might be the same thing. How do you make the observability better? It might be the same thing, right? So, okay, so it maybe doesn't change the ratio so much. Like we're just arming everybody. We're enabling everybody to be faster, and instead of changing those ratios all that much. Okay. Do I have it right?
Yeah. I think it's hard to say on the ratio. What what
Yeah.
what makes me feel good and sleep at night is not to chase the cost center reduction trap too much as a software
I know.
engineer. So I'm like,
Yeah.
how can we just deliver more value better and see that?
Yeah.
And
Yep.
with as a quality engineer, maybe the ratio headcount would be lower. But this, you could look at that one way and go like, oh, these QEs, there's risk there. But you also say
Yeah.
like AI as a tutor is going to allow them to become software engineers or do something
Yeah.
else. So like,
Yeah.
I guess you move towards something and not away something kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, absolutely, absolutely, yes. Move towards, not away, 100%. But my own experience is that, like now with Claude Code in my life, and again, I don't get to use it in my day job. I use it like on a side project where it's really just me. I find myself like I am much more product manager, that technical product manager that you described, and QA person.
Mhm.
I feel that like there's sort of a hole in the part of me that used to do software development, and Claude Code stole it all, right? So it's almost been the opposite for me, where instead of like, if you think about like Cucumber and behavior-driven development and automation around test suites and functional test suites and all that stuff in sort of the 2000s, 2010s, and 2015s, and we sort of went overboard with it at some point. And that did change testers' ratios. I'm almost wondering if it changes it back,
Yeah.
where like now your software developers are doing more testing than they are doing coding, because they're really getting the agent to do that part. It needs to be guided, right? And they're also sort of playing architect and senior engineer. But somebody has to test all this code that's being created, and it is being created more quickly. So yeah, I don't know. I
Yeah,
think that's where I keep going with
that's a
this
good
ratio
point.
question.
I mean,
Yeah,
that's a good point because if you have more test automation, but it's AI generated, then maybe you don't know whether to trust the test automation, which I've known
that's right.
is being
That's
bogus.
right.
And so
Yep.
you need a human in the loop to actually check this thing. And maybe the
Yeah.
developer is not the right person to check their own work, except for
Right.
to do things like TDD, which may
Right.
be questionable. So yeah, I could see that as well. I,
Yep.
I think
Yep.
I think understanding the QE that is kind of growing into this area, understanding AI and understanding what it doesn't do, it can kind of foresee those pitfalls would be,
Yeah.
and like looking at all of the gotchas there, because there are
Yeah.
some.
Yep. So we are coming up on time, so we need to bring this to a close. But a couple more questions for you. Anything else about what the future looks like? I mean, we talked about it a lot already, but like anything else that you're seeing right now?
Um, Maybe a more daring, futuristic. I've been pretty conservative here, to be honest, but maybe more daring, a futuristic view of like, and I'll use an analogy is that everybody has been so wrapped up about clean code and code quality, and I think we
Yeah.
should like understanding code and maintaining code is way more effort. I think it's percentage of time than the
Mm-hmm.
writing code to begin with, and that's what we've been doing. But maybe
Mm-hmm.
coding becomes a higher level work with AI assistance.
Yeah.
And maybe you use
Yep.
AI to understand that code. So like the analogy of that would be back in the days you had to do memory management and it's like, how would you do Java and like not worry about memory
Yeah.
management? Or I remember someone in the 90s telling me like, look, I had to write all this IO stuff myself, and now you have this Java file class, like onward and
Yeah. Yeah.
onward.
Yep.
That like if you see that progression, maybe all the details, like the Java garbage collection details or other things like that, they're going like, don't worry
Yeah.
about that. So make
Yeah.
sure that the code is good enough, but maybe some of the things that make it hard, that AI allows you to be a little bit higher level. Because I think that's what all we're
Yeah.
doing with frameworks and languages and platforms and cloud
Yep. Pushing
services.
the abstraction higher. Yeah.
So like, I mean, that's a pretty bold thing to say because right now I don't, I guess I'm saying it now, but like, I don't think like we should behave that way tomorrow
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
the next person may actually not be using AI to understand that. But I would not be
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
if I had to predict, I'd say in a few years that all of this worry about the curly brackets and the different things is less matterful because you can just have
Yeah.
AI just go clean it up or fix it or explain it to you. And actually, maybe capturing that tacit or tribal knowledge is more important than actually the code because
Hmm.
if you can't get it out of the artifacts what people were thinking, for instance, from the code, you can never get it with AI. So that actually
Yeah.
becomes more important than the code.
Hmm.
But that's more
Interesting.
of a hot take, maybe. But that's kind of
I get it. I get it. Yeah. Okay. So, a final question, and this is sort of just for you. It could be a book you're reading, or it could be a show you're loving, or a movie, or anything. Like, what's giving you joy right now? Like, what's something you'd want to shout out?
I mean, so I thought it was really awesome to go to ETLS and Gene Kim and Steve to meet them and present there,
Nice.
and that was a wonderful experience. And to talk to a whole bunch of people like that, I think Grainger is an awesome place to work. There's a lot of people that are passionate about this. My leadership, Eric, Dan Capetta, Emily, now
Mm-hmm.
Oshman, and
Mm-hmm.
Johnny Leroy. Just great team to work for. Um, I personally, the more I get into technology and get excited about this stuff, I also just have this opposite effect where I just want to be out in nature. So it was wonderful to go to New
Yeah.
Zealand and road trip and look at birds and mountains and trees and stuff like that. So I guess
Yeah.
I'm extremes on both sides.
Love it. Love it. Great answer. So we're gonna have to make sure we link to. Does the ETLS talk have like a link where we can go watch it online or anything like that?
I don't. I think if you register, you can see that
Okay.
for
Cool.
with IT Revolution. But I don't think it's published.
Got it.
Um,
Got it. Okay. Well, we'll try to get the link in case people want to register. Then they can. Yeah.
awesome.
Philip, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kyle. It's my pleasure.
They're small.